Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a subject to you that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know, and that is the role of dialogue and free speech, and why it's important in a nutshell in a few minutes. And something that's going on currently that is kind of new and very, very much hostile to free speech that you might not be aware of. I wasn't aware of it until I put my finger on it, so hopefully it's interesting to some people. Anyway, it's human nature to grow, to thrive, to survive. Importantly, to survive, to find ways to survive against adversity, against hostile forces of nature, hostile people throughout history, human history, especially hostile people, right? Mankind's biggest challenge is himself, usually. But in the vein of survival, there are some obvious tricks and tactics that people use sometimes to get out of situations or to obtain things, which, in nature might be food or shelter, people, mates, whatever. But in civilized society, the things we may obtain by any means necessary are, material goods, money, opportunity. And the tricks haven't changed. That's the interesting thing. And I'm going to connect this to the subject in just a second. The tricks are, well, it's not always a trick, right? There's hard work, there's ingenuity, creativity, there's also deception. There's cheating, stealing, and as deception, you have a whole universe of things that people have learned to do, have come up with as far as obtaining control of other people by unscrupulous and dishonest means. This is a refined science at this point. It is an art form, and it's pretty well documented in certain places. And to get to the point, deception involves telling you a lie of some kind or omitting something important. And the way to do that without consequences or problems is to remove the possibility of exposing the lie. So, without getting too much into detail about how to lie to people effectively, there is a culture surrounding this mentality where people primarily subsist on surviving by way of deception. And not to attach too many labels to it, but that's kind of the substance of how they get by, how they live. And the way you do that is by controlling people's belief, whether they realize it or not. I'm kind of dissecting it a bit, but to get back to the subject is free speech and dialogue. Why are these things important? Well, it turns out free speech and dialogue are the number one defenses against people lying and deceiving, disseminating misinformation on purpose for the purpose of controlling people and their beliefs for whatever reasons, usually to get something from them, obedience, money, whatever. But free speech is very, very important. Without it, you can almost guarantee the vacuum of free speech will be filled in a short time by a monologue, a culture of do as I say, don't question things, and not surprisingly, the quality of information begins to drop immediately in that environment. So I am at almost 5 minutes already, and I'm gonna bring a real world example. I've been using a lot of real true stories from my own life in my videos, and I think it's kind of helping. It's helping me if no one else. There's a disturbing new trend where people are using this monologue culture that we have fallen back into. If you ask me, it waxes and wanes over the years. It's not the first time we've had a monologue culture, but we are definitely back in one now. And what's happening, which may actually be a new thing because of technology and computers and the internet, how efficient things have become to communicate and organize and conspire between administrators or whoever. There's a strategy being used by these same people who have evolved to, whatever. I'm not trying to single out people because of their heritage, but for whatever reasons, certain people have the pattern and habit of deceiving people to get by. It's their main business. So what they're doing now, again, to get to the point at 6 minutes, is they're convincing people, users of websites, just consumers, whoever, that conflict is bad. They're saying they're calling it drama. They're calling it all kinds of labels that are charged, that have a connotation and an emotional value already. So they're getting people on board with conflict is all bad. Let's keep people peaceful and orderly, and they're not really interested in that. So what they're doing, for example, on social media, especially, and in particular, they're saying, well, if there's two parties who have a debate or a dispute, any kind of argument, we're going to exaggerate it, first of all. We're going to blow it out of proportion, say that it's, maybe hate speech, maybe it's contrary to the spirit of the platform. There's just tons and tons of language around this stuff already. And then what they do, now here's the trick. We pick the side that is closest to our own. The administrators, the website, the whoever, And what you don't see is that many of these quote unquote conflicts were provoked for that purpose. It's actually a very tidy little grift where you say, in the interest of peace and order, there will be no more conflict allowed. Zero tolerance of fighting, arguing, debating. And of course, there's going to be arguments because we're human beings. We got different perspectives, different needs, different everything. And when it happens, they say, oh, well, we're going to just delete this guy or that woman or whoever because, well, the other person happened to agree with us. Shoot. Well, that's real. They don't tell you that. They don't, point that out. But one of the people, in the event of an altercation, is permitted to continue, is just automatically decided to be the victim, and the other person gets deleted, or their comments, or whatever. And this is happening everywhere. It's happened to me in a very organized, systematic way for years. And it's not okay. It's not okay. And the real tragedy, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm at 8.5 minutes. The real tragedy is when everything becomes a monologue. The only thing you have left are lies and disinformation, things based on wishes and not facts. Things that don't need to be verified anymore because we're not allowed to talk about it. And ultimately things that fall apart. That's the problem. Problem is when you base infrastructure, plans, or anything on lies, by definition, they fall apart. That's what happens. Anyway, gone on and on. So hope you have a great day. Reach out at whitehotrobot@gmail.com with questions or comments. Take care.